What if I told you there's a plant that contains more omega-3 fatty acids than salmon, delivers a complete amino acid profile rivaling steak, grows faster than most commercial crops, requires minimal water, restores damaged soil, and produces usable food, fiber, oil, medicine, and fuel? Yet for most of the last century, possession of this plant could land you in prison. What if I told you this plant was once prescribed by doctors, sold openly in pharmacies, used by governments, cultivated by farmers under legal mandate, and considered so essential that entire economies depended on it, before it was suddenly rebranded as dangerous, deviant, and criminal? What if I told you the nutritional profile alone threatens entire sectors of the modern food industry, while its medical properties compete directly with some of the most profitable pharmaceutical categories on Earth? Today, this plant is either dismissed as a drug, reduced to a culture war symbol, or hidden behind euphemisms like alternative and supplement. But for thousands of years, it was none of those things. It was normal. It was necessary. It was trusted. Then something changed. Not because the science changed, not because the plant changed, but because power, money, and control enter the equation. And almost overnight, a plant humanity relied on for food, medicine, and industry was recast as a public enemy. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what this plant is, what it does inside the human body, why it was suppressed, who pushed for its criminalization, and who continues to benefit from keeping you dependent on substitutes that are less effective, more expensive, and easier to control. This channel exists for one purpose: to examine claims against evidence, narratives against records, and official stories against documented history. We are not here to provoke outrage or sell rebellion. We are here to follow the money, read the archives, and expose what was deliberately buried or conveniently forgotten. When information threatens entrenched interests, it is often dismissed, diluted, or quietly removed from public memory. That is where this channel operates. If this kind of work matters to you, staying subscribed is not about supporting a creator. It is about ensuring that uncomfortable facts remain visible, searchable, and difficult to erase. The plant is Cannabis sativa, specifically industrial hemp, and its non-intoxicating nutritional and medicinal components. This is not a discussion about trends, recreational use, or political identity. It is not an argument for intoxication, and it is not a surface-level debate. This is about documented agricultural, nutritional, and medical reality. Before you dismiss this, understand this clearly. What you were taught about this plant was not designed to inform you. It was designed to simplify, stigmatize, and erase distinctions that mattered. Distinctions between fiber, food, medicine, and intoxication. Cannabis sativa is one of the oldest cultivated plants in human history, and its criminalization is not ancient. It is modern, specific, and traceable. Start with nutrition. Hemp seeds contain all 9 essential amino acids. This makes hemp a complete protein, a category shared by very few plant foods. Gram for gram, hemp protein delivers comparable amino acid density to beef, without cholesterol, without antibiotics, and without the environmental cost of livestock production. Now omega fats. Hemp seed oil contains an ideal ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids, approximately 3 to 1. The ratio most closely associated with reduced inflammation, cardiovascular health, and metabolic balance. Salmon is celebrated for omega-3s, yet hemp provides alpha-linolenic acid in quantities that rival or exceed many fish sources, without heavy metal contamination or supply chain fragility. But nutrition is only the beginning. Cannabis interacts directly with the endocannabinoid system, a regulatory network present in every human body, involved in pain modulation, immune response, mood regulation, appetite, sleep, and neuroprotection. This system was not discovered by accident. It exists because humans evolved alongside plant cannabinoids. Compounds like CBD interact with receptors that regulate inflammation, seizure thresholds, anxiety responses, and neurodegenerative processes, without producing intoxication. From a systems perspective, This plant does something rare. It supports regulatory balance rather than forcing a single outcome. Pharmaceuticals often target one receptor, one pathway, one symptom. Cannabis compounds modulate networks. And that matters, because network-level regulation is difficult to patent, difficult to monopolize, and difficult to turn into lifelong dependency. This plant is cheap to grow, adaptable to multiple climates, and produces food, medicine, textiles, construction materials, biodegradable plastics, and fuel. From an industrial standpoint, it competes with timber, cotton, petroleum, synthetic fibers, pharmaceuticals, and processed food proteins simultaneously. And that is not an accident. If this plant is so nutritionally dense, medically functional, environmentally efficient, and economically versatile, why was it removed? Why was it banned? Why was it ridiculed, criminalized, and erased from legitimate discourse? Pause here, because the answer has nothing to do with public safety and everything to do with who stood to lose power when this plant remained legal. To understand that, we have to go backward. For most of recorded history, cannabis was legal, normal, and essential. In ancient China, hemp was used for medicine, rope, paper, and food. In India, it was part of Ayurvedic medicine for pain, digestion, and anxiety. In the Middle East and Africa, cannabis preparations were documented in medical texts centuries before modern pharmacology existed. In Europe and North America, hemp was an industrial staple. Early American farmers were required by law to grow hemp. It was used for sails, rope, uniforms, paper, lamp oil, and medical tinctures. Cannabis extracts were sold openly in pharmacies throughout the 19th century and listed in the U.S. Pharmacopoeia until the 1940s. Doctors prescribed it. Governments taxed it. Industries depended on it. The shift begins in the early 20th century. At the same time cannabis was being used medicinally and industrially, three powerful industries were consolidating influence. Timber and paper corporations, synthetic fiber and petrochemical companies, pharmaceutical manufacturers moving toward patent-based medicine. Hemp posed a direct threat. It produced paper faster than trees. It produced fiber stronger than cotton. It produced oils, fuels, and medicines that could not be patented. Then came regulation, not through scientific review, but through narrative framing. In the 1930s, U.S. regulatory bodies began associating cannabis with crime, racial fear, and social disorder. Industrial hemp and psychoactive marijuana were intentionally conflated. Language shifted. The plant was no longer cannabis or hemp. It became marijuana, a foreign-sounding term used to generate fear. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 effectively criminalized cannabis through impossible compliance requirements, despite opposition from the American Medical Association. No evidence of widespread harm was presented. Economic and political pressure was. This was not organic public demand. It was engineered regulation. Fear did not arise naturally. It was built. Media campaigns portrayed cannabis users as violent, insane, or morally corrupted. Films, newspapers, and political speeches repeated the same claims without evidence. Medical nuance was erased. Industrial distinctions were eliminated. Hemp farmers were treated the same as drug traffickers. Language did the work. A plant became a narcotic. Medicine became a gateway. Farmers became criminals. This framing justified enforcement budgets, prison expansion, and the removal of a competitor from the market, all while presenting the action as moral protection. It was intentional, because fear is more effective than data. The consequences were not abstract. Millions were arrested. Families were separated. Careers were destroyed. Patients were denied treatment. Entire communities were disproportionately targeted under cannabis enforcement policies, despite similar usage rates across populations. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical substitutes, often more addictive and more dangerous, were approved, marketed, and protected. Pain patients received opioids. Anxiety patients received benzodiazepines. Epilepsy patients waited decades for recognition of cannabinoid therapy. The cost was not just economic. It was biological, psychological, and generational. And was avoidable. Today, the contradiction is impossible to ignore. Peer-reviewed research confirms cannabinoid efficacy in seizure disorders, chronic pain, inflammation, nausea, and neuroprotection. Countries that lifted restrictions did not see the predicted collapse. Crime did not spike. Public health did not deteriorate. Instead, medical access improved. Black market influence declined. Tax revenue increased. The same plant once described as having no medical value is now the basis of FDA-approved medications. The fear narrative failed every empirical test, yet the stigma lingers. Why? Because incentives remain. Pharmaceutical companies profit from patentable, single-target drugs. Industrial agriculture profits from monocrops and controlled inputs. Petrochemical companies profit from plastics and synthetics. Regulatory bodies justify budgets through continued enforcement frameworks. Hemp does not fit neatly into these systems. It is decentralized. It is multipurpose. It reduces dependency. And systems built on dependency resist replacement. This was never about safety. It was about control. It was about profit. It was about deciding which solutions people are allowed to access. You are not uninformed by accident. You were misinformed by design. The science was available. The history was recorded. The suppression was deliberate. Do not take this video as truth. Take it as a starting point. Read the studies. Examine the laws. Follow the funding. Ask who benefits when effective, natural, and scalable solutions are restricted. Ask why a plant with this profile was treated as a threat. And if you believe information like this deserves to remain visible, not hidden, not diluted, supporting this channel is not about algorithms. It is about keeping the record intact. The story was never that this plant was dangerous. The real danger was that it worked.